This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Few producers of Doctor Who are as polarising as Stephen Moffat. Well, actually, they've all been polarising since 1975. But despite taking Doctor Who in an experimental and mostly popular direction, Moffat has always faced a lot of criticism for his writing. I personally enjoy Moffat as a Doctor Who writer. He has had his fair share of duds and I dislike a lot of his work, but I've always liked his experimental storytelling and willingness to take risks. However, there is one aspect of him I absolutely cannot stand in the slightest. A trope many fans have come to detest, forming the basis of a lot of complaints about his era of the show. Stephen Moffat cannot let characters die. I'm sure you've heard many discussions about this before, but I thought it was about time to really dive into the guts of the problem and reveal just how extensive it is within the Moffat era of Doctor Who. It's an era of lies, deception, and fake-out deaths, which is why I don't think it would be a controversial statement to say that Stephen Moffat single-handedly devalued character death in Doctor Who. If you, for whatever reason, disagree with that, cool, let me try and change your mind. If you agree, awesome, hopefully I can give you more justification. And if you're on the fence, well, I guess you'll just have to enjoy the ride. And beware of spoilers for the following episodes and stories. There are too many for me to say out loud, so just look at the screen. This is your last warning. Got it? Alright. Let's begin. Moffat devalued character death in Doctor Who, but you know something different that has great value? Squarespace! You've probably heard of Squarespace before, and for a good reason. It's a slick service which allows you to build your own professional website from the ground up. You can even buy your own unique domain without any hassle or confusion. Like me, the proud owner of www.harbowholmes.co.uk. Thanks to Squarespace you can pick all sorts of URL endings without hidden fees. It's honestly so easy. Okay, I'll level with you. I have no idea how to make a good website, but with Squarespace I was able to create my own great site through their easy tools, like creating photo galleries, tour dates, text boxes, and so on. There's so much you can do, all with just a few clicks. And if that sounds good to you, wait until you hear that your site is automatically optimized for mobile as you build it. I really recommend checking Squarespace out, so go to squarespace.com/harbowholmes right now for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. In this day and age, it always helps to have your own website. So a massive thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. And now, on with the video. First of all, let's set the stage. Doctor Who is a long-running show with so many characters coming and going. However, during the original run of the show, it wasn't actually common for a companion to die, or even leave in a tragic way. Companions often found a new purpose or settled down somewhere. There was never much to it, apart from a few forced departures like Susan, Jamie, Zoe and Sarah Jane. However, the comfy atmosphere of Doctor Who would be rocked on the 4th of December 1965, as brand new companion Katarina would die in the Daleks' master plan, followed just under 2 months later by Sarah Kingdom as well, becoming the first companions to ever die in the show, communicating the magnitude of this massive scale serial. These deaths even played a part in Australia refusing to screen the story, possibly causing a lasting reluctance to kill off a companion, since it would take a whopping 17 years for another companion to die. This death was Adric's, which was a vastly different style of death compared to his two predecessors. Where those two had been short-lived characters, Adric had been a companion for 10 stories by the time he died in Earthshock, which was his 11th. It was an unprecedented, bold decision that once again sent ripples throughout the entire show, even if he was a vastly unpopular character whose death many fans actually celebrated. There's also Peri, who was initially killed off in Mind Warp before her death was retconned in The Ultimate Evil, but we'll just kind of ignore that for now. The reason I bring up this sparse track record of companion death is because of what it conveyed at the time. The trio who died all represented the risks of travelling in space and time, how it wasn't always a fun and exciting adventure. These deaths showed there were real consequences to these stories on the main characters. Where the Doctor could just regenerate, these companions would remain dead, a constant chilling reminder of the dangers they all faced on a weekly basis. So now that I've established this background context, let's hop forward in time to 2005, when Doctor Who was famously revived under the guidance of Russell T Davies. One of the main reasons Doctor Who was cancelled in 1989 was the public perception of it being too camp and silly. Even though BBC controller Michael Grade had a personal hatred for the show because of its production values, this was a sentiment shared by the general population, who considered it outdated compared to the flashy sci-fi shows of the time like Star Trek The Next Generation and Quantum Leap. So when Doctor Who came back, there was almost a wordless promise to make it up to date, which is what we saw as Series 1 took heavy inspiration from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This meant plenty of angst and edginess, along with drama between the Doctor and companion. The overall tone was a lot grittier than Classic Who, so it made sense that the death toll would also be higher. We had a brief taste of companion death with Captain Jack Harkness, although he was always intended to return, so he was resurrected. However, even though Davies didn't want to kill off his companions, he still wanted to give them suitably dramatic exits, such as trapping Rose on a parallel world and erasing Donna's mind and sense of self. This era was so steeped in constant death and pessimism that all the main characters surviving didn't really matter. Instead, it was always the supporting characters who got killed, such as the absolute bloodbath in Parting of the Ways. However, this brings me to my next point. Since even in this era of clear-cut death, there was always one writer still bending the rules. And of course, you know I'm talking about the Grand Moff himself. As we all know, Stephen Moffat endeared himself to Doctor Who fans with 4 incredible stories in the Davies era. Stories so acclaimed and beloved that they secured him the showrunner job from 2010 to 2017. However, as I mentioned, he's had a long-running issue with allowing his characters to die. Fans have always pointed this out, but what if I was to tell you this issue existed even before he became showrunner? Obviously, we all know the iconic end of the Doctor dances, when everyone is restored to life and...
just this once! Everybody lives!
But whilst this was a nice subversion of the usual death tolls, it set into motion a recurring problem. Aside from Madame Pompadour, the real-world historical figure who had to die and stay dead, every main character in these stories survived in one way or another. Like River and her crew dying, but being saved in a data cloud to live a digital life forever, once again stating,
"Everybody lives."
Their fates still have some level of tragedy, but the consistent revival of dead characters counteracts said tragedy and lessens the impact of their deaths, since there's almost always an asterisk next to it. As a singular plot, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes so repetitive, the impact of the death itself is lost, removing the element of tragedy from the show, especially when you take into account that Moffat changed the endings of New Earth and Doctor's Daughter to avoid death, since both the infected and Jenny were supposed to die. In the case of New Earth, it works well, a heroic triumph of the Doctor saving the day. But Jenny's resurrection removes that element of tragedy from the episode, lessening the emotional weight of her sacrifice. So now you can see where things start adding up. Indeed, this radical avoidance of death would come to a head with Amy and Rory during the 11th Doctor era. These characters are the single personification of Moffat's problem regarding death. Just look at Rory, whose constant dying even becomes an inside joke within the TARDIS team. Initially he was comic relief, a bumbling and hapless geek, but his death in Amy's choice was a big story beat, since it led to Amy finally embracing her love for him and not trying to shag the Doctor as much. It worked because it was a dream, so it was a good way to temporarily kill off a character to further the story of those characters. But then Moffat looked at the audience and said,
"You wanna see me do it again?"
Literally the very story after, Rory dies again, being erased by the cracks in time, so we can put his death counter at 2. Again, you can somewhat understand the death, since it contributes to his and Amy's shared character journey. But then it happens more and more throughout the era, with Rory dying around 7 times and Amy herself dying around 6 times. Killing off a companion is a good idea for drastic stakes and big drama, but you need to have the balls to stick with a decision, like they did with Adric. Compare Rory to Captain Jack. Both characters became known for constantly dying, but with Jack it became his gimmick. He was literally immortal, so there was a clear storyline reason for it every time, and his initial death had consequences on a character level. But with Rory, it just happens a lot without any real reason. When you look at how Moffat treated Amy and Rory, it reeks of him having his cake and eating it too. Each time he does one of these fake out deaths, they become less and less valuable. I mean, just look at Night Terrors. In that, Amy is converted into a peg doll, technically dying. Their earlier deaths at least added added something to the narrative in one way or another, but this one contributes nothing to the plot. It's completely glossed over and Rory doesn't even acknowledge it. By the time you get to Angel Take Manhattan, their big, grand romantic sacrifice to stop the paradoxes becomes a bit of an eye-rolling moment because you know they'll be fine. They always are. If this had been the first time since Hungry Earth that either character had died, it would be incredibly powerful and dramatic. But they're constantly being killed or faking their deaths, which just cheapens the whole experience. The most annoying part is how he writes the two characters out of the show. They have the perfect departure in God Complex, the Doctor leaving them behind at their new home before he unintentionally inflicts more harm on them. It's a touching moment and the best way to end their tenure in the show, especially after Amy spent so long running away from her relationship with Rory. However, Moffat then brings them back as if nothing has changed, only for them to die at the hands of the Weeping Angels. Rather than this being some sobering lesson of proving the Doctor right for leaving them behind, it feels like a get out of jail card because the glimpse of crushing tragedy is immediately counteracted by the knowledge of Weeping Angel victims living out satisfying lives in the past. Exactly what we had seen in Blink, another story without tragic deaths, since Kathy and Billy were just fine in the end. So when the same fate befalls Amy and Rory, there's still the tragedy of the Doctor never seeing them again, but that impact is lessened since they still are technically alive, just in a different time zone, so to speak. Sure, it fits into the fairy tale aesthetic of this era of the show, but it ends up a bit of a slap to the face of the viewer because it's another in a long list of these cop-outs to avoid proper consequences, but it's not as much of a slap to the face as the Doctor's own history of dying under Moffat. Moffat's track record of companion death fake-outs is staggering, but let's just take a quick detour to touch upon the fact he's treated the Doctor the exact same way. I'm sure we all remember the shocking Series 6 opener, The Impossible Astronaut, where the Doctor was struck down and stayed down, forming the basis for that series as he marched towards his inevitable death. But then you get to the Wedding of River Song and it turns out the Doctor was a robot all along, the real Doctor was fine. This resolution is acceptable in a vacuum, but when you take into account all the other reverse deaths, it's another example of the writer killing first, explaining later. There's also the egregious plot point in Lie of the Land, where the Doctor fakes his own regeneration for the sole purpose of putting it in a trailer. The fake regeneration had worked wonders in the Series 4 finale, because not only was it an iconic, crowd-grabbing cliffhanger, it also became a defining part of the plot, contributing to the solution at the end. But in Lie of the Land, it's literally only there for advertising. Moffat's only goal there appeared to be kill the Doctor, then undo it. This approach works well in Heaven Sent because it's a time loop designed to torture the Doctor. However, the context of these recurring deaths drives the narrative forward to create a thrilling and gratifying climax as opposed to killing him for the sake of heroically undoing it. To be completely honest, we're a postmodern audience. We know the only high stakes tend to occur in the finale. There are some exceptions of course, but we suspend our disbelief each week despite knowing nothing bad will happen. Doctor Who is never about whether the Doctor will win, it's how the Doctor will win and at what cost. So you don't need constant fake out deaths to the titular character to make the plot interesting or captivating. Moffat didn't seem to understand that, leading to the stories constantly peeling your eyes open and pointing to the screen like, look, the Doctor is dead, only to plant a galaxy-sized asterisk next to it just seconds later. Okay, so when it comes to Moffat undoing death, there's a pretty definitive example of not touched upon yet. Clara Oswald. Now, I'm a huge, unashamed simp for Clara, and I always will be, but her habit for surviving death was there from the very beginning. In Series 7, her character arc was the Impossible Girl, splintering into echoes throughout time and dying to save the Doctor in episodes like The Snowmen, where she was a doomed companion, kind of like Astrid. However, even after naming the Doctor, she left the TARDIS 2 more times, storming out and kill the Moon, forcing the Doctor to take a step back and change his behaviour, before she then left again in Death in Heaven so the Doctor could move on from her. These were both meaningful, character-driven exits, but when you get to Face the Raven, the idea of the character leaving for good has already been eroded, along with a majority of the audience not liking her anyway. However, that didn't stop her death in Face the Raven being a powerful moment. embracing her fate after trying too hard to be like the Doctor and paying the price for it. Like Adric all those years before, it shows how dangerous this lifestyle is, and how overreaching can cost you your life. It's what happens in Hellbent though that ruffles a lot of people's feathers. Indeed, just before dying on Trap Street, Clara is pulled out of time by the Doctor, who is desperate to save her, feeling inescapable guilt for his unconscious part in her death. Ultimately, even though she still has to die in that fixed point in time, she's given a TARDIS to travel through space and time forever, kind of going against those consequences of trying to be the Doctor. Imagine if Adric was pulled out of time at the last minute and given a TARDIS to roam through the universe. It would be awful and completely defeat the point of his death. This turn of events understandably made the audience feel cheated and shortchanged because of how much weight Clara's death was given in Face the Raven and Heaven Sent. They set up this grand sacrifice and her own acceptance of death only to pull that from right underneath you, almost like it had never happened at all. If anything, this reversal of Clara's death was the boiling point. The watershed moment when the viewers finally had enough of these big dramatic deaths being undercut and undone. Even though Hellbent and Twice Upon a Time stressed that Clara would 100% still die on Trap Street no matter what, it does take a lot away from the ending of that episode. Look at Donna in comparison. She had a similar path of becoming like the Doctor and paying a price for it. She became a literal embodiment of the character, a half-human, half-Time Lord hybrid. But rather than dying, the Doctor wiped her mind to save her, which came at the cost of her character growth and maturity as a person. This perfectly captured the despair of losing a companion, despite Donna still being alive. Davies ultimately stuck by his own rules without resorting to death, since Donna never regained her memories, although they almost botched that in End of Time. Clara, on the other hand, gets to bend the rules of her own death so dramatically that she can continue doing what got her killed in the first place. It was simply a case of being the straw that broke the camel's back. Sure, the Series 8 finale had actually kept a dead character for once, that being Danny, but Moffat still wasn't able to resist the idea of a way out, even if that wasn't used. From River to Amy and Rory, the Doctor to Clara, Moffat had fallen into a habit of resurrecting these characters because he was too attached, sacrificing any kind of tragic death for happy endings that feel forced and frustrating. Take Osgood, whose identical clone sister died in Death in Heaven, but then was conveniently replaced by a new Zygon in the Zygon inversion. Unless your name is Danny Pink, Moffat would give you unlimited plot armour, which I personally feel goes against Doctor Who's character development. It's no longer suspenseful and dramatic, becoming too predictable. Characters should either stay dead or be written out in a more suitable way. Martha walked out to look after her family. Donna's sense of self was torn away from her. These are suitable exits that work much better for their characters, rather than relying on dramatic deaths for the sake of, well, drama. That leads me to my final example. Bill Potts. After the downturn in ratings during the Moffat era, the showrunner decided to give the show a bit of a soft reboot for Series 10. With the end of Hellbent, all the baggage had been conveniently lifted, including wiping the Doctor's mind of Clara, so everything was set for a new start. However, as Live the Land showed, Moffat's tendencies remained as prevalent as ever, something that caused a ruckus at the end of The Doctor Falls. In the cliffhanger of World Enough and Time, Bill had been converted to a Cyberman at the hands of the Master, spending The Doctor Falls trying to cope with a horrifying new reality. In the end, she helps battle and defeat the Cybermen, ready to sacrifice her life for the greater good, only for her puddle girlfriend Heather to show up and make her human again. Moffat later revealing that Bill went back to her usual life and lived happily ever after. Much like Clara, this was one resurrection or undo too many, a step too far. Even after this soft reboot, Moffat couldn't bring himself to kill off the main character permanently. In comparison, Nardol's exit is handled so much better. He doesn't die, but the implication is that eventually the Cybermen will catch up to the colonists and he will die. That's the tragedy of the situation, something very similar to Rose being trapped in a parallel world. Bill, on the other hand, has her tragedy but still comes out the other side unscathed and actually better than she was before, since she can now yeet through all of time and space with Heather, just like Clara and her TARDIS. You don't have to kill a companion for there to be tragedy, something Davies proved exceptionally. There were plenty of satisfying ways for Bill to leave, with or without dying. The problem is how the events played out. Twice Upon a Time would still imply that she died, but that doesn't help to alleviate the sour taste in everyone's mouths after how she escaped her death in The Doctor Falls. Again, it's Moffat having his cake and cheating the audience as he eats it as well. At the start of this video, I said I like Moffat as a writer, and I still do. I enjoy the majority of his Doctor Who work. However, he's an incredibly stubborn writer who likes to reuse his own tropes and story beats so often it can wear down the audience. What began as a wonderfully fresh subversion of the norm in The Empty Child became a frustrating onslaught of fake-outs and cheap tricks. In the 33 episodes starting with the 11th hour and ending with Angels Take Manhattan, there's roughly 22 deaths of the TARDIS crew. That is an incredibly high number considering not a single one of these characters ever permanently died. There was always some kind of asterisk next to it. One of the biggest sacrifices you have to make as a writer is being able to let your characters go. But Moffat seemed to never be able to bring himself to that point, always finding some loophole or shoehorning in a happy ending. It's one of the reasons that, against all odds, I respect Chibnall for letting Graham and Ryan walk away unscathed, in a similar vein to Martha. Sure, that actual exit was terribly written, but at least the show didn't mess you around and fake out their exits dozens of times. For a deceptively downbeat era with uplifting optimism, it makes sense that Moffat would strive to give characters happy endings. But the main problem is that he always seemed to believe you had to kill them first. When Doctor Who was revived in 2005, there had been 3 companion deaths in 26 years. It was something reserved for the most dramatic of moments. But since 2005, companion deaths have become so common that they're almost expected, despite none of these actually being permanent. When you kill off a character, you need to stand by it, but Stephen Moffat never could, and it's my firm belief that Doctor Who character death has been irreparably devalued ever since. All thanks to the abuse of one singular trope, and as always, thanks for watching. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to all my gold level patrons: Alex Marston, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Fowland Cortez, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, George, John, Stephen Evan Miller, and William Jewell. Thank you so much for your support.